A blizzard rages through the Adirondack Mountains as Navy SEAL Ethan Ward follows his loyal dog Rex into the storm and discovers a wounded mother, her daughter, and a secret worth billions. Moments later, gunfire tears through the snow. The killers aren't strangers. They wear the same insignia Ethan once did. Now, he must choose: protect his past or fight for their future. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe miracles still happen, subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. The Adirondack Mountains were buried under a silence so deep it seemed carved from ice itself. Snow whispered across the pines, and the wind carried the hollow cry of something ancient. Loneliness, perhaps? Or warning? Ethan Walker trudged through the drifts, his breath a pale ghost in the dim blue light. He was a Navy SEAL on a covert reconnaissance mission, one meant to monitor a suspected smuggling corridor running between frozen lakes. His figure, wrapped in tactical winter gear, looked more like a moving shadow than a man. At 36, Ethan had the hard-carved face of someone who had seen too much war to ever find rest. His square jaw was dusted with dark stubble, his nose slightly crooked from an old break, and his brown eyes carried a weight that no uniform could hide. Each scar on his weathered skin told a fragment of the same story: brothers lost, promises unkept, ghosts that walked beside him even when he slept. Beside him moved Rex, his German shepherd partner. 5 years old and built like a sleek, black and tan wolf, Rex's every movement was measured, fluid, and alert. His ears pivoted with radar precision, his breath fogging the air in quick, steady bursts. He had served alongside Ethan through 2 deployments and carried his own quiet gravity, a creature both fierce and loyal, with eyes the color of burnished amber that saw everything and judged nothing. In the frozen desolation, Rex was not just a companion, but the only heartbeat Ethan trusted. The mission was supposed to be simple: observe, report, extract. But simplicity was a lie the wilderness didn't believe in. Hours had passed without radio contact from command. The wind had turned mean, slicing across the skin like razors, and Ethan's instincts whispered that something had shifted in the snowbound world around them. His training told him to stay the course, maintain the grid, but instinct, older and wilder, was stirring in his chest. Rex stopped ahead, body tensing. The dog's tail dropped, his shoulders lowering into a cautious crouch. His nose twitched once, twice, then his head turned sharply toward the north. A low growl rolled through his throat, not one of aggression, but of warning. Ethan froze. His gloved hand moved automatically to rest on the rifle slung across his chest. "What do you see, boy?" he murmured, voice barely louder than the wind. Rex didn't move forward. He only glanced back, eyes flickering with urgency, then looked again toward the forest, where the trees thickened into a black wall. 1,000 small decisions made across years of combat moved through Ethan's mind like clockwork. Check direction, wind flow, sound pattern, visibility. Nothing seemed wrong, no movement, no lights, no sound. Yet the forest beyond felt different. It wasn't the calm of nature, it was the quiet of something holding its breath. "Show me," Ethan said simply. Rex moved, not running but gliding through the drifts, his paws whispering over snow that hid roots and shadows. Ethan followed, his boots sinking deep, his senses snapping into full alert. He had walked through jungles that smelled of blood and dust, through deserts that swallowed screams. But this silence, this hollow chill of the Adirondack winter, was a predator, of its own kind. The deeper they went, the more the world seemed to close in. The trees thickened, ancient firs heavy with snow, their branches hanging like the hands of sleeping giants. The faint smell of smoke, wood smoke, faint but human, threaded through the cold. Ethan stopped. Rex stood ahead, ears flat, gaze fixed. Through the lattice of trunks, Ethan saw it. The corner of a roof, just visible beneath the slope of rock and pine. He blinked against the snowflakes clinging to his lashes. A cabin. No coordinates on his map showed a structure here. No patrol reports mentioned habitation in this quadrant. His breath fogged as he crouched low, studying the terrain. Whoever lived here didn't want to be found. He gestured Rex to heel and approached with silent precision, boots muffled by the snow. The cabin was small, maybe 15 feet across, built of dark, weather-worn logs. The roof was patched with bark and moss blending into the hill as if nature itself had been bribed to keep it secret. Faint smoke curled from a stone chimney, a fragile signal of life in an indifferent wilderness. Ethan's heartbeat slowed to its measured combat rhythm. He knew this pattern. Isolation, concealment, secrecy. Not a hunter's lodge, not a lost hiker's refuge. This was a hideout. He moved to the blind side, where no windows faced the clearing, and crouched behind a fallen cedar. The smell of old wood and cold metal filled the air. His gloved fingers brushed over a bullet casing half buried in the snow. Recent, maybe a week old. His eyes narrowed. Rex let out a soft, low whine, staring at the door. Ethan followed his gaze and heard it, the faintest sound carried by the wind, barely more than breath. A voice, weak, feminine, desperate. "Please, is someone there?" For a moment his mind flashed through every regulation, every field protocol. Approach with caution, confirm hostile presence, maintain operational integrity. But beneath those cold doctrines, something older stirred, a soldier's instinct to protect, not destroy. He rose slowly, stepped from cover, and crossed the small clearing. The door was rough-hewn pine, its hinges rusted but still solid. He knocked once. Silence. Then another faint sound, a cough, followed by a low moan of pain. Ethan's training and humanity collided. He pushed the door gently. It opened with a creak like a sigh. Inside was shadow and heat, the smoky warmth of a dying fire. The air smelled of damp blankets and fever. On a cot against the far wall lay a woman, her face pale as paper, dark hair clinging to her forehead with sweat. She was perhaps 30, slim but strong-boned, with a face that once might have been proud, but was now hollowed by exhaustion. Beneath the blankets, her body trembled from fever chills, and there, in the corner, half hidden behind a wooden chair, stood a small girl, 5 or 6 at most. She had chestnut hair tangled around her shoulders, a wool coat 2 sizes too big, and eyes that didn't belong to a child. They were large, dark, unblinking, watching Ethan, not with fear, but with a soldier's kind of stillness, as if she had already seen too much. The woman's lips parted. "He found us," she whispered. Her voice cracked, raw with fever and terror. Ethan's instincts screamed questions. Who was chasing her? Why here? How long had they been alone? But he didn't ask. Instead, he turned to the child and spoke softly. "It's all right. My name's Ethan. I'm here to help." The girl said nothing, only pressed her small hand protectively against the woman's arm. Rex stood beside Ethan, head low, tail still. The dog's presence seemed to calm her more than his words. Ethan crouched by the cot, checking the woman's pulse, the heat of her skin, the faint rasp in her breath. She was burning up. Pneumonia, or worse. "You've been sick for days," he muttered, half to himself, "and hiding." She blinked weakly, eyes glassy. "He'll find her," she murmured. "He always does." Ethan looked toward the small child again, feeling the chill of her silence like a knife. The snow outside moaned against the cabin walls. Somewhere far off, a branch snapped under the weight of frost. Rex lifted his head sharply, ears pricked, growl rumbling deep in his chest. Ethan turned toward the window, the soldier's reflex tightening every muscle. Through the frost-streaked glass beyond the pale blue gloom, a single flicker of light moved between the trees, steady, deliberate, approaching. The flashlight beam drifted closer through the white haze, cutting between the trees like a blade of light through fog. Ethan's muscles locked, every sense narrowing to the cold silence that followed. Rex's low growl was steady now, a living radar locked on the movement outside. Ethan reached back slowly, his gloved hand closing around the handle of his sidearm. He turned to the woman on the cot. "Stay quiet. Don't move," he whispered. Laura's fevered eyes widened, but she nodded faintly, clutching Sophie close. The little girl pressed her face into her mother's arm, not crying, only breathing shallowly as if fear had become a routine. Ethan crouched near the window, the glass rimmed with frost. The light flickered again, nearer this time, but then it stopped. Only the whisper of wind and the distant crackle of snow falling from the branches. His heartbeat slowed to that familiar battlefield rhythm. Slow, measured, precise. He clicked off his small tactical light and waited. 5 seconds, 10, nothing. Then from the forest's edge came a voice. Low, male, deliberate. "Hello? Anyone there? You folks all right in there?" It wasn't a threat. It wasn't friendly either. The tone was even, professional. Too professional. Ethan peered through the window. A man stood just beyond the clearing, his parka hood drawn low, a rifle slung across his shoulder. The man's stance told him more than words could. Balanced, alert, not a lost hiker. Ethan exhaled slowly, weighing his options. He could stay hidden and risk the man circling closer, or confront him before he did. Rex gave a sharp, silent glance. Permission or warning, Ethan wasn't sure. He stepped out of the shadows, opened the cabin door halfway, and leveled his voice. "That's close enough." The man froze at the sound, raising one hand in an easy, unthreatening gesture. "Didn't mean to scare you, friend," he called back. "Name's Hank Dorsey, game warden out of Keene Valley. Saw smoke from the ridge and wanted to check no one froze to death out here." Ethan's eyes narrowed. The story sounded plausible, but Hank Dorsey's gear didn't fit the part. His parka was new, urban tactical cut, not issued by Park Services. The rifle wasn't a hunting model, it was a suppressed AR platform. And the way he scanned the tree line while talking told Ethan this man had been trained to enter hostile ground. "Appreciate the concern," Ethan said coolly, "but we're fine." He kept his weight balanced, ready to move. "You can report it in from the valley." Hank gave a small, easy smile. He was in his early 40s, lean, with wind-chapped skin and dark blonde hair slicked back from his temples. A short beard framed a mouth too calm, too deliberate. "Sure thing," he said, "but looks like you got a woman and a kid in there. You really think it's safe to sit tight in this weather?" Ethan didn't answer. Rex stood beside him, silent, but coiled. The man's eyes flicked down to the dog, then back up. "Beautiful shepherd," Hank said softly. "Smart eyes. Military issue, right?" That was enough confirmation. Ethan felt the truth settle like lead in his stomach. This wasn't a warden. This was reconnaissance. Advance scout for whoever Laura feared. "We're good here," Ethan repeated, colder now. "Turn around and walk away." For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Hank's smile flickered, something sharp and knowing beneath it. "All right," he said lightly, stepping back into the trees. "Stay warm, friend." He disappeared into the white, leaving only the sound of wind and the faint echo of crunching boots fading downhill. Ethan closed the door and bolted it. The silence that followed was too deep, too deliberate. He turned to Laura. "Who's looking for you?" Laura struggled to sit up, her face pale under the fever's waning glow. "His name's Edward Crane," she whispered. "He's Sophie's grandfather. He runs a company, Crane Dynamics, security, analytics, money. He owns people, Mr. Walker, including men like the one you just saw." Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from the memory of control. "I was his executive assistant for 6 years. I saw what he did to employees who got too curious. Families bought off, names erased from databases. When my sister died, I promised I'd keep Sophie safe. He said she was his legacy. I knew what that meant." Ethan listened, mind sorting details with military precision. The expensive satellite phone, the out-of-place backpack, they made sense now. "You ran," he said simply. She nodded. "And he sent people to bring us back. They have resources, tech, drones, private teams. He won't stop until he gets her." Sophie sat quietly on the floor, drawing small shapes in the frost near the hearth with her finger. The firelight caught her eyes, brown and solemn, like her mother's, but steadier. "Will they find us again?" she asked softly. Ethan met her gaze, his throat tightening. "Not tonight," he said. The night deepened. Ethan took stock of the cabin's defenses. 2 windows, 1 entrance, dense forest to the north, and exposed clearing to the south. The place was small but defensible with enough warning. He laid out his medical gear, gave Laura another dose of antibiotics, and wrapped her in a wool blanket. Her breathing was steadier now, though her hands trembled as she tried to drink. "Why help us?" she asked suddenly, voice breaking the quiet. Ethan looked at her over the rim of his canteen. "Because I've been on both sides of a rifle," he said, "and I know what happens when no one shows up." For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of burning wood. Outside, the storm rose, wind keening across the cabin roof. The snow thickened until even the trees vanished behind a white curtain. Rex lay by the door, head on his paws, eyes never closing. Ethan sat beside him, back against the wall, his rifle across his knees. Around midnight, a faint electronic crackle broke through the static of the handheld radio clipped to his belt. It shouldn't have been active. He'd disabled his receiver hours ago to avoid detection. Yet now, faintly through the interference, came a coded burst of static. Then a voice, low and distorted. "Walker, if you can hear this, abort. Your position's compromised." Ethan froze. Only one person still used that call sign for him. Commander Hal Benton, his superior from the SEAL Recon Unit he'd thought had been disbanded 2 years ago. But that was impossible. The channel wasn't military standard anymore. Someone had piggybacked his old encryption key. He turned down the volume, heart hammering. Laura stirred weakly, unaware. Sophie had fallen asleep, curled near Rex's flank. The dog's ears twitched, picking up what Ethan already knew. Someone out there was using his name to draw him out. The radio hissed again, and this time the voice sharpened. "Walker, Respond. We know you've made contact. Extraction team inbound. ETA, 30 minutes. Ethan stared at the device, his breath clouding the air. Extraction team. Either it was a rescue he hadn't requested, or the trap had just widened. He switched off the radio completely, jaw tightening. Then, almost imperceptibly from somewhere outside, Rex's head lifted. His ears pointed north, body rigid. Ethan rose to a crouch, rifle ready, and moved to the frosted window. Through the blur of snowfall, faint red lights were blinking in the trees, low, rhythmic, advancing, not flashlights, drone markers. The beams of red light moved like eyes in the blizzard, steady, methodical, and inhuman. Ethan's breath misted as he crouched by the window, his rifle tight against his shoulder. Outside, the snowfall glowed faintly from the drone's scanning beams, revealing dark silhouettes advancing through the tree line, at least 3 figures, maybe 4. Their movements too disciplined for hunters, too quiet for searchers. Rex pressed close to the floorboards, muscles coiled, tail rigid. A living sensor locked on the rhythm of boots breaking snow. Laura stirred weakly, confusion etched across her fever-pale face. "What is it?" she whispered, clutching Sophie, who had woken and now clung to her mother's sleeve. Ethan didn't answer right away. His mind worked in clean, tactical increments. Count the lights, map the angles, predict their breach point. "We've been found," he said finally. His voice carried no panic, only the grim certainty of a man who had said those words too many times in his life. He turned from the window. "Laura, get her into the back corner. Stay low. Don't make noise." He glanced at the small girl, her brown eyes wide, but unflinching. "You understand me?" Sophie nodded once, silent as snowfall. Ethan moved to the fireplace, grabbed the iron poker, and pushed the burning logs apart, dimming the flame until the light inside was almost gone. Shadows swallowed the cabin, save for the faint glow from his wrist-mounted tactical screen. The digital compass blinked weakly, interference from the drones scattering the signal. Whoever they weren't improvising. They were coordinating. The first figure appeared through the fog, crossing the tree line and crouching near a fallen log. He wore full winter tactical gear, white camo parka, snow goggles, night optics clipped to his helmet. The rifle in his hands wasn't civilian, it was an M4A1 with thermal scope and suppressor. Ethan recognized the silhouette instantly. Ex-military contractors, private operatives, Crane's men. One of them raised a hand signal, a closed fist. The others froze. Then a second signal, advance. Ethan's training surged back like instinct. He dropped to his stomach, motioned Rex toward the far window. "Guard perimeter," he whispered. The dog slid silently into position, nose twitching, body trembling with restrained aggression. A sound broke through the wind, a low mechanical hum. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "They brought drones," he muttered. "Not just recon units this time." The hum deepened, and from above the ridge a small quad rotor emerged, its camera lens glowing like a red star. It swept low, its sensors casting a faint grid of red across the snow and the cabin roof. Ethan's mind raced. If the drone tagged them with IR, they'd triangulate his position and radio the strike team in seconds. He moved fast, pulling his combat knife from his belt and unscrewing the radio's battery to avoid signal trace. He needed light interference, something to confuse their sensors. He ripped the iron poker from the fire pit, still hot, and slammed it into a tin cooking pot, placing both near the window. Heat, bloom, enough to create a false target. Outside, the first mercenary approached. He was large, broad-shouldered, perhaps mid-30s, with a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, a reminder of close-quarters brutality. Through the glass, Ethan caught his face as the man adjusted his goggles. Cold blue eyes, expressionless, professional, the kind of man who had stopped thinking about morality long ago. Rex let out a single low bark. The sound drew the mercenary's aim. His muzzle lifted. Ethan didn't hesitate. One shot. Controlled. Silent. The man dropped, body disappearing into the snow mist. The silence after the shot was worse than the noise before it. The rest of the team froze. Then chaos. A voice crackled over their encrypted comms. Echo 3 down. Contact made. Suppress and breach. Ethan ducked as a hail of suppressed rounds tore into the cabin walls, splintering logs and sending snow pouring through the cracks. He crawled toward Laura's corner, shielding the women with his body. Sophie whimpered but didn't cry. She bit her lip until it bled, her tiny hands pressed over her ears. "Stay down!" Ethan barked. Rex bolted from cover, lunging through the back doorway into the storm, disappearing behind the cabin's flank. Ethan trusted him. Rex's training wasn't obedience, but instinct. Outside, a shout rang out, followed by a strangled cry and the sound of a body collapsing into the snow. Ethan used the moment's confusion to drag Laura toward the root cellar trap door beneath the cot. It was small, barely a storage crawl space, but it might buy them minutes. "You both stay here until I call you out," he said. Laura's hand clutched his wrist. "What about you?" "I'll handle it." He met her gaze, her dark eyes, hollow with fear, but still carrying a spark of defiance. "You've already done enough running," he said quietly. "Let me do the rest." She hesitated, then nodded. Ethan dropped the trapdoor close, threw a rug over it, and turned back toward the door. The storm screamed outside. He reloaded, counting the last few rounds in his magazine. A shadow crossed the window, then a metallic thud. A flashbang rolled through the snow, landing against the doorframe. Ethan's reflexes took over. He kicked it back out just before it detonated, lighting the forest with a flash like lightning. Shouts followed, disoriented, panicked. He fired twice into the light, then ducked behind the overturned table as bullets shredded the air. From the tree line came a deeper voice, amplified through a headset. "Walker, we know who you are." Ethan's chest froze. No one outside his old unit should know that name. The voice continued, calm, taunting. "Your old commander says hello." He felt something twist inside. Old anger, old ghosts. The voice came again. "You were supposed to die in Kandahar, weren't you? Shame about Echo Team. Benton always said you had a habit of surviving the impossible." Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing the memories down. He scanned the tree line, tracing the source of the voice. There, a tall figure in full tactical armor standing with authority while the others regrouped. The helmet's visor caught the glow of the burning debris, reflecting red. Whoever he was, he knew Ethan's file, his trauma, his guilt, and he was using it. The figure stepped forward. When he spoke again, his tone was almost conversational. "Mr. Crane sends his regards. He wants his property back. The woman, the girl. You give them up, and I'll make sure your death looks like a hero's." Ethan's reply was quiet, deadly. "Tell Crane he'll need a bigger team." The mercenary gave a short laugh, then raised a hand. The drone above the ridge dipped lower, its red light intensifying. Ethan realized what it was carrying a second too late. A micro-charge pack, small but powerful enough to ignite a structure. He dove for the floor as the explosion ripped through the side wall, fire and snow colliding in a storm of smoke and splinters. The blast threw him across the room, his head striking wood. Through the haze, he saw the front door burst open. Figures in white poured through the firelight. Rex reappeared, teeth bared, leaping at the first intruder. The gunfire that followed drowned everything: the wind, the shouts, the roar of the burning roof. And amid it all, one voice cut through the noise. Sophie's. From beneath the trap door, she screamed his name. The explosion had stolen the air from the room. Ethan's lungs burned as he crawled through debris and smoke, his ears ringing from the concussion. Flames licked the wooden beams above, painting the cabin in a violent dance of orange and blue. The wind howled through the ruptured wall, carrying the snow inside in thick, ghost-like waves that hissed against the fire. The world was chaos, soundless and spinning, until he heard it again. Sophie's scream. It pierced through the ringing in his ears, sharp, human, and terrified. He forced himself to his feet, swaying, vision swimming. Splinters stuck from his jacket. Blood streaked the side of his face, dripping from a gash above his brow. "Sophie!" he shouted, his voice raw, but the smoke swallowed the sound. His eyes darted toward the trap door. It was open. A figure knelt there, a large man in white armor, his back turned, arm reaching down into the hole. Ethan raised his rifle. The magazine was nearly empty. He fired anyway. The muzzle flash lit the room like lightning. The shot struck the man in the shoulder. He jerked backward, roaring in pain, his hand wrenching away from the opening. Ethan sprinted across the collapsing floor, leaping over debris. The mercenary turned, swinging his rifle. The two collided, crashing against the cabin wall in a struggle that was more primal than tactical. The man was huge, easily 6'4", built like a bear under his winter gear. His face, visible for a split second through the cracked visor, was rough-hewn and brutal, a thick beard, framing a mouth twisted in rage. His name tag was half torn, but Ethan caught a glimpse. "Briggs!" Briggs slammed his fist into Ethan's ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Ethan countered, using momentum to twist the man's rifle aside. The weapon went off, the shot splintering the doorframe inches from Sophie's hiding place. Briggs swung again, snarling, "You should have stayed dead, Walker." The words hit like a blade of memory. Ethan gritted his teeth, driving his elbow into Briggs's throat. They went down in a heap, grappling in the choking smoke. Rex suddenly burst through the shattered window, a blur of black and tan. The German shepherd hit Briggs like a missile, teeth clamping onto his forearm. The mercenary howled, trying to shake him loose. Ethan used the moment to grab a shard of wood and drive it into Briggs's shoulder joint. The man collapsed with a guttural cry. Ethan staggered up, panting. The cabin structure groaned. Flames raced across the beams. He kicked the trapdoor wider. "Out, now!" Laura crawled up first, coughing, her face streaked with soot and tears. Sophie followed, clutching her small backpack. Ethan grabbed both by the arms and pulled them toward the broken wall. The snowstorm outside had intensified, white chaos swallowing everything. He didn't have time to check for the rest of the attackers. The fire had already become a signal flare visible for miles. "Move!" he barked. They stumbled into the storm, the cold slamming into them like a solid wall. The air outside felt alive, roaring, endless, merciless. Ethan could barely see 5 feet ahead. The glow of the burning cabin faded behind them. replaced by the whisper of the wind and the crunch of snow under boots. Rex trotted close, occasionally looking back, his muzzle flecked with blood and frost. They followed the downhill path toward the frozen river that cut through the valley. Ethan's mind worked through the noise and exhaustion, mapping terrain from memory. The drone had likely transmitted their location before being destroyed. Reinforcements were inevitable. He needed shelter, high ground, and concealment, all before the next contact wave arrived. Laura stumbled once, and he caught her arm. She was shivering violently, face ashen from fever and shock. "I can keep up," she managed, though her voice was nearly gone. Her hair matted with ice, framed eyes that flickered between determination and despair. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Crane, he'll burn the whole mountain if he has to." Ethan didn't argue. He just kept walking. They reached the river, a vast white ribbon frozen solid. The ice cracked in jagged lines that glowed faintly under the moonlight, breaking through clouds. Ethan knelt, brushing snow aside to check its thickness. Safe enough. They could cross, but it would expose them. He looked back. Through the snow, faint points of red light pulsed near the burning wreck. Movement. Coordination. He turned to Rex. "Track," he ordered. The dog lowered his nose, sniffing against the wind, then barked once and trotted north along the riverbank. Ethan guided Laura and Sophie after him. The blizzard seemed to grow heavier with every step. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours of endless white and cold. Laura's steps faltered. Ethan finally lifted Sophie into his arms and urged Laura onward. His body screamed with fatigue, but the old SEAL rhythm took over. Breathe, move, protect. It was all that mattered. After what felt like forever, Rex stopped ahead, barking twice, sharply. Ethan squinted. There, a dark shape against the snow. An abandoned ranger station, half buried beneath an overhang of ice. Its roof sagged, and the door hung askew, but it would do. Inside was darkness and the smell of rot and old wood. Ethan cleared the corners with his pistol, then waved them in. He found an old kerosene lamp on the counter, its glass cracked but serviceable. With a spark from his lighter, the small flame filled the cabin with dim golden light. Laura sank against the wall, shivering uncontrollably. Her lips were blue. Ethan stripped off his outer parka and draped it over her shoulders. Sophie sat beside her, clutching Rex's neck, her small face buried in the dog's fur. The animal's warmth was steady, his amber eyes calm, anchoring them all. Ethan moved to the table, spreading out what little gear remained, a few rounds of ammunition, 2 ration bars, and the satellite phone he'd recovered from Laura's pack. He powered it on, shielding the screen from view. The signal indicator flickered weakly. For the first time, he saw what Crane had done. The device wasn't standard civilian. It was a tracking relay transmitting a faint encrypted beacon every 6 hours. He cursed under his breath and pulled the battery free. "They've been following you the whole time," he said. Laura's eyes filled with tears, not from weakness but from exhaustion. "I thought I was careful. I didn't know." He shook his head. "You couldn't. He's using corporate-grade tech, not military. It piggybacks off low-orbit bands." Outside, the storm moaned across the valley. The world had turned to darkness and white noise. Ethan sat down heavily on a broken bench, his mind tracing options. He'd been trained to survive ambushes, not wage wars against billionaires with private armies. But now, with a feverish woman, A child and a wounded dog who refused to rest, he was outnumbered and surrounded by ghosts of his past. He reached for the small photo tucked inside his inner pocket, the one of his SEAL team. 5 men smiling in desert sunlight. Ben Carter was in the middle, his arms slung across Ethan's shoulder. The photo was burned at one edge from an explosion years ago. "Still watching, brother?" he murmured. Sophie stirred. "Who's that?" Ethan blinked, surprised. "A friend," he said. "The best kind. The kind that doesn't stay gone." Laura opened her eyes halfway. "You think ghosts can help us?" Ethan smiled faintly, the first in days. "Sometimes they lead us out." Before she could respond, Rex's head jerked up. His ears twitched, nose pointed toward the door. A faint rumble echoed through the storm, low, mechanical, rhythmic. Ethan stood, rifle raised, listening. Then he saw it through the cracked window. Beams of pale blue light sweeping across the valley floor. Searchlights, moving in formation. And behind them, barely visible against the snow, the unmistakable outline of a helicopter lowering through the blizzard. The helicopter's floodlights carved through the storm, turning the falling snow into a curtain of white fire. Ethan shielded his eyes, his instincts flaring between fight and disbelief. That insignia, the stylized trident of SEAL Team 9, shouldn't exist anymore. The unit had been decommissioned after Kandahar, after the mission where Ben Carter died. Yet the black hawk-sized aircraft bearing its mark was descending less than 50 yards away. Rex growled low, his fur bristling. Laura stirred from her half-conscious state, the flickering light painting her face pale and frightened. "Is it them?" she asked weakly. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know. He slung his rifle and moved to the broken window, glass crunching beneath his boots. The helicopter touched down roughly, rotors slicing the air into chaos. The door slid open. 3 figures emerged through the snow, silhouettes against the floodlight. They moved like soldiers, tight formation, synchronized. The lead figure raised a hand, signaling cease. "Walker!" a voice shouted through the wind, sharp but unmistakably human. "Hold fire! We're friendlies!" Ethan froze. No mercenary would use his real call sign, not unless they knew him. The figure stepped closer, pulling off his helmet. The light caught his face, a weathered man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair cropped short and eyes the color of frozen water. His face was lined with years of command and guilt. Commander Hal Benton. Ethan felt something between shock and anger. Benton had been his commanding officer, a man both feared and respected. Once tall and broad-shouldered, Benton now carried the weight of too many ghosts. His movement slower, but his presence unbroken. He wore a tactical cold-weather uniform marked with no flag, no unit, only the trident pin glinting under his collar. "You're supposed to be dead," Ethan said flatly. Benton gave a humorless smirk. "You're not the first to tell me that." The other 2 men stepped from the shadows. One was a younger soldier, early 30s, with a rugged square jaw and an old burn scar climbing his neck. His name patch read Davis. His posture was rigid, his movements disciplined, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty, like a man doing a job he didn't fully believe in. The second, a woman, surprised Ethan more. She was tall, lean, wrapped in tactical gear, her blonde hair braided tight under her hood. Her nameplate read Ramos. She couldn't have been more than 28. Her blue eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked from Laura to Sophie to the dog, calculating threats in silence. Benton stepped closer, his boots crunching over snow. We tracked the same mercenary team that hit your cabin, Crane's private force. They call themselves Shadowline. We've been monitoring them for weeks." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You expect me to believe you just showed up out of the goodness of your heart?" Benton met his stare. "I expect you to believe I owe Ben Carter's ghost more than I owe the U.S. government." The words struck deep. Ethan said nothing. Behind him, Sophie had crawled to the window's edge, her small eyes fixed on Benton's team with animal caution. Laura struggled to her feet, voice trembling. "You're not with Crane?" Benton shook his head. "Crane wanted my silence. I refused. He tried to have me erased." His eyes flicked to Ethan. "You and I were both ghosts before this night, son. The difference is, they found you first." Snow hissed across the valley, carried by the downdraft of the rotors. Benton gestured toward the helicopter. "We need to move. His drones are still in the air. That fire back there will bring half of Crane's men within the hour. You want that kid to live? You come with me." Ethan hesitated. He didn't trust easily, certainly not a man who'd once sent him into a mission that cost 3 brothers their lives. Yet there was something different in Benton's eyes now, a weariness that looked a lot like truth. Rex nudged his leg, impatient, sensing his indecision. The dog's fur was caked with frost, his breath fogging the air in rhythmic bursts. Sophie looked at Ethan, clutching her small pack. "We should go," she said quietly. "The fire's too close." That settled it. Ethan nodded once. "All right, but if this is a trap, I'll make sure none of you leave the mountain." Benton almost smiled. "Still the same, Walker." They made their way through the storm toward the helicopter. Davis led the way, scanning the tree line with a carbine rifle. Ramos brought up the rear, eyes darting between shadows. Once inside, the warmth of the cabin hit them like a wave. Ethan helped Laura and Sophie into the rear seats, wrapping them in thermal blankets. Rex lay at their feet, alert but calm, his golden eyes tracking every movement. The interior of the aircraft was modified, stripped of insignia, fitted with advanced comms and data screens. Benton sat across from Ethan, his gloved hands clasped. "Crane's operation isn't just about the girl," he said over the roar of the engines. "He's building something called a Aurora, a predictive AI system using illegal biometric data. Sophie's inheritance trust isn't money. It's access to encrypted servers her parents built before they died. Her DNA unlocks the core algorithm." Ethan's stomach tightened. "You're saying he wants her as a key?" Benton nodded. "Exactly. And you just made yourself the last obstacle between him and that key." The storm outside thickened as they lifted off. Below them, the valley was a swirl of flame and shadow. From above, Ethan saw faint lights, vehicles moving fast through the snow, a convoy of black SUVs. Crane's men were coming. Laura stirred weakly. "Where will you take us?" Benton looked toward her, his tone softening. "There's a place we call Echo Point, old SEAL training site buried under decommissioned radar bunkers near Lake Placid. Off the grid. You'll be safe there, for now." Ramos moved to the cockpit, checking instruments. Davis sat beside the door, cleaning his weapon with mechanical precision. His voice cut through the hum. "Safe is a relative term, Commander. Crane's got satellites, thermal drones, ex-CIA trackers. You think he'll stop?" Benton didn't answer. Ethan watched the exchange silently, noticing the tension between the two, loyalty held together by fear. The flight lasted 40 minutes, though the storm made time meaningless. When they finally descended, Ethan could barely see the landing pad until they hit the snow. The helicopter powered down beside a row of dark steel doors carved into a cliff face. Floodlights flickered to life, revealing a series of concrete bunkers half buried under ice. They disembarked quickly. Benton led them inside the main structure, a narrow corridor lit by emergency lamps. The air smelled of oil and metal. Ethan's boots echoed softly as they walked. He noticed old stenciled letters on the wall, Echo Base, and a fading seal emblem below it. Inside, the command room was small but functional. Computers, maps, radio consoles. Ramos dropped her gear and started powering up the systems. Davis took position by the door. Benton turned to Ethan. "You've still got the instincts," he said. "That saved them tonight." Ethan didn't reply. His attention was on Sophie, who sat quietly near a heater, holding Rex's paw as if it anchored her to the world. Laura watched her daughter with a faint, fragile smile. For the first time in days, the fear in her eyes eased just a little, but peace was never meant to last. The radio on Ramos's console crackled, loud and sudden. She frowned, tapping the receiver. "Commander, you need to hear this?" Benton leaned over. The transmission came through distorted, but the words were clear enough to freeze the blood in the room. Echo Point. Compromised. Incoming hostiles. Multiple heat signatures approaching fast. ETA 10 minutes. Ethan's eyes met Benton's. The older man exhaled slowly. "He found us faster than I thought." The blast tore through Echo Point like thunder trapped in a tomb. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the underground base into choking darkness. Ethan's first instinct was survival. "Down!" he shouted, pushing Laura and Sophie behind a steel console as fragments of concrete rained from above. The air filled with dust, gunmetal, and the acrid tang of smoke. Rex barked sharply, the sound echoing off the corridor walls like a heartbeat in the void. Emergency lights flared weakly, bathing the bunker in ghostly red. Benton's voice cut through the chaos. "They've breached the eastern tunnel. Davis, hold the secondary door. Ramos, get me visual." The two soldiers moved instantly, their training taking over even as the walls trembled around them. Ethan rose, rifle ready. "How many?" Benton checked the feed from a cracked monitor, only static. "Enough to bury us here if we stay." The old commander's face was a portrait of battle fatigue and grim resolve, lines of exhaustion carved into his skin, the scars of command and consequence. Yet his blue-gray eyes still burned with that unyielding purpose, the kind that could rally men even as the world collapsed. "We'll buy time," he said. "You take the girl and go." Ethan shook his head. "We don't leave people behind." Benton gave a dry, humorless laugh. "You sound like Ben." The mention of his fallen brother-in-arms hung in the smoke like a ghost. Ethan remembered that day in Kandahar, the radio silence, the explosion, the promise he never kept. And now, in this frozen tomb beneath the mountains, history was demanding payment again. A deep metallic thud reverberated through the tunnel, breaching charges. Ramos cursed softly under her breath and grabbed a shoulder-mounted launcher from the rack. The young woman's face glistened with sweat despite the cold. "If they come through, I'll slow them down," she said. Benton placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "That's not a request. That's suicide." Ramos met his gaze. "Then let's call it duty." She gave a tight smile, loading a shell into the chamber. Her bravery was quiet, resolute, the kind that never sought recognition. Ethan saw in her the reflection of every soldier who fought because Someone had to. Laura clutched Sophie close, whispering words Ethan couldn't hear. The child's wide eyes darted between the adults, understanding more than she should. Rex stayed pressed against her leg, unmoving, protective, a silent guardian forged from instinct and love. The next explosion tore the reinforced door from its hinges. A wave of gunfire followed, strobing the room in flashes of white and red. Ethan dove for cover, firing in controlled bursts. Davis took position near the entryway, his carbine barking flame as shadows surged forward. The sound was deafening, metal screaming, men shouting, the air alive with bullets and dust. Benton moved like a man who had made peace with his ghosts. "Fall back to the north tunnel," he ordered. "Go." He turned toward Ethan, eyes steady. "You get her out of here, Walker. She's the future. Don't let him have it." Ethan hesitated only a heartbeat. Then he grabbed Laura and Sophie, pulling them toward the maintenance passage. Ramos covered their retreat, firing until her weapon clicked empty. When the final explosion hit, the shock wave hurled Ethan to the ground. The sound that followed was pure silence, the kind that follows loss. He came to in the outer corridor, half buried under debris. His ribs screamed with every breath. Rex was beside him, limping but alive. The dog nudged his shoulder until he moved. Through the haze, Ethan saw Benton and Davis still fighting, two silhouettes against firelight. The last he heard of Benton was his voice over the intercom, rough and calm. "Echo Point, mission complete, for the ones who still believe." Then the line went dead. Ethan stumbled onward through the emergency exit. Snow rushed in through a cracked hatch, cold and pure against the heat of destruction. He half carried Laura up the slope, Sophie clinging to Rex's fur. Behind them, Echo Point collapsed inward, the mountain swallowing its dead. They reached the ridge just as dawn broke, a thin band of gold cutting through the clouds. For the first time in days, the wind softened, and the snow fell gently instead of biting. Sophie looked back toward the valley, her small voice trembling. "Are they gone?" Ethan knelt beside her. "They're home now," he said quietly. "They bought us this sunrise." Laura placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm despite the cold. "What now?" she asked. He looked east, where the sun bled over the mountains. "We finish what they started. We make sure Crane never hurts anyone again." Far below, in the smoking ruins of Echo Point, a single transmission pulsed faintly from a damaged console. Benton's final failsafe. Encrypted files began uploading to multiple global servers. The truth of Aurora, the corruption, the experiments, the murders, was already spreading. Crane's empire would soon crumble under its own secrets. Ethan didn't know it yet, but his name, and Ben's and Benton's, would become symbols whispered by those still fighting for light in the dark. That evening, as the storm cleared, he built a small fire on the ridge. Sophie sat between him and Laura, leaning against Rex, who rested his head on her lap, eyes half closed in contentment. The flames reflected in Ethan's tired eyes, turning them amber like the dog's. For the first time, he smiled, not the hollow smile of survival, but something deeper, almost peaceful. Laura spoke softly, her voice trembling. "After everything, how do you still believe?" Ethan looked at the horizon where the sun met the snow. "Because," he said, "every miracle starts the same way. Someone refuses to give up." Above them, the sky blazed pink and gold, and for a brief, perfect moment, the world felt redeemed. In every storm, There is a light we cannot see until we walk through the dark to find it. Ethan's journey reminds us that miracles don't always arrive as flashes of glory, but as endurance, loyalty, and the courage to love again after loss. Sometimes God's greatest work is hidden in the smallest acts of faith. A soldier refusing to abandon hope, a mother holding her child through the fire, a loyal dog standing guard in silence. So tonight, wherever you are, pause. Look at the people beside you. Forgive someone. Hold your family tighter, because even in our brokenness, God still writes miracles through our scars. If this story touched your heart, share it so others might feel its warmth. Comment below what part spoke to you most, and don't forget to subscribe so that these stories of faith, courage, and second chances can reach more souls who need them. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may His light guide you through every storm you face.